everybody, Happy New Year. Welcome back to my channel. We're going to kick off 2020 by continuing my series where I talk about my experience as an undergraduate studying archaeology in Canada. In case you've missed it, I've already talked about my first year, my second year, my first summer in field school, and today we're going to be continuing with my third year of school. So I started my third year in September 2010, and I had just come back from 6 weeks of field school and then a further 2.5 weeks of traveling around Egypt and Israel, which I've also talked about. All these videos will be linked down below in the description box if you're interested. And I would say that that summer was definitely one that changed my life in terms of it reaffirmed my passion and my love of archaeology. I did love doing field work, that it wasn't too much for me. It was an amazing opportunity to travel to a bunch of places that I had read about before only in textbooks and have some really great experiences and to solidify bonds and friendships that I had already been developing in my first and second year of school, because there's nothing like throwing a bunch of people who are already friends in the middle of a country where they don't really speak your language and you have to live out of each other's suitcases for a couple weeks. So that was really amazing. I would really say that third year was really where I hit my stride when it came to my school. As I've said before, I really felt like studying archaeology at university was kind of a place where I quote unquote met my people. I wasn't a popular person in high school. My best friend lived 40 minutes away, and going on to field school and then going to third year university was probably the first time in my life that I felt not really popular, but just I had lots of different friends and lots of people to hang out with, and I was just kind of part of the group, and that was a really, really great thing. This was also the semester where I went from doing just Near Eastern archaeology into doing Near Eastern and classical archaeology, and this is for basically a really kind of retrospectively a bit of a stupid decision that I regret. But as I said in my previous video, math was not my strong suit, and I almost bombed our most maths heavy class in my second year. And when I first started at Laurier, they had 4 streams of archaeology that you could specialize in, but partway through my degree they decided that to basically streamline it. So they combined prehistoric and historic archaeology into one specialization and classical and Near Eastern archaeology into another. Now anyone who had started off in the 4 streams could continue doing that for the rest of their degree, or you could choose to switch over. And I chose to switch over because the new stream didn't require you to take a statistics class, whereas the old stream did. I now regret that. Statistics are quite valuable and they're quite useful, especially in research, and I really should have taken that class and just sucked it up, but I didn't, and I switched over to the new program, and so my course load that for the next 2 years kind of reflects that a little bit more. While I was on field school, I also happened to discover not only that I enjoyed field archaeology, but my interest in human osteology, which is the study of human skeletal remains. And this is entirely because of the fact that I was able to excavate human remains while I was on field school. Now, these were not related to the actual site that we were digging, which was Iron Age. These were much later, kind of medieval burials, but they were on our site, and in order to get to the Iron Age deposits, we had to excavate these skeletal remains. We obviously studied them, but we also reburied them as well, according to Islamic tradition, because they were from an Islamic period. And something really cool, I don't think I talked about this story in my field school thing, but as you go along, you find stuff, and one day I was digging and I found this kind of pretty, really gorgeous rock. It was black with a turquoise center, and I kind of put it aside in my pretty rock collection that I was keeping together. Don't think I actually ever brought any of them home. Just anytime something kind of catches your eye, you put it aside. And then my dig director came over a couple minutes later, and I was talking, I was like, oh, look at this rock, do you think I'd be allowed to keep this? And she's like, no, because that's not a rock, that's a piece of glass bracelet, and we found stuff like this before. That means there's going to be burials in this area, so you need to keep an eye out for anything unusual, because the minute that we have a burial, you have to stop what we're doing and we have to contact our on-site osteologist and proceed accordingly, because obviously I'm an archaeology student, I'd never done this before, I couldn't do this on my own. So a little while later, we did come across some skeletal remains. They brought over the osteologist and her team, which were students that specifically came with her from her university, because it was different than mine. And I basically got placed with one of those students, and then we excavated this skeleton together, and they kind of were teaching me what to do. And so basically a little while ago, well, I say a little while ago, in 2014, the results of some analysis on the bracelets and stuff that we uncovered has been published in the Journal of Islamic Archaeology, which I just received this week in the mail. This particular article is about our site, and specifically it's about the glass bracelets, not the skeletons, but it has a picture of the first ever skeleton I excavated. So that's just really cool for me to see. So like I said, this article in this journal is actually about the bracelets themselves, because these particular batch of skeletons we found that year, we found like a ton of glass like bangle bracelets and also some beads from a necklace with it, so like actual like jewelry. No gold, but still, you know, a status item in some respect. She basically had a sacrum part of her pelvis, but the rest of her pelvis wasn't there, so like from the hips down, there was nothing left. I don't remember what we thought about the legs, but they must have been disarticulated at some point. She had like a bangle right around her right elbow, which also had signs of osteoarthritis. There was like eburnation right on the end of it, which you could see really well, which was quite cool. She had almost no teeth, like all of her back teeth were gone, and her jawline had basically, because bone is a living thing, had reformed without her two sockets, so it was like almost entirely smooth. So she was probably, between the evidence of osteoarthritis and the fact that she'd lost all of her teeth and her jaw had had time to reform and to basically get rid of the two sockets, kind of indicates that she would have been an older individual at the time of her death. But yeah, we found like a bunch of really interesting stuff, and that's the first skeleton I ever got to excavate. So she had a bangle, like I said, around her at the bottom of her elbow. I think they were in pretty good pieces. Like the bangles themselves, while they were glass, like they were actually in pretty good condition. Two of them were almost like entirely complete, even though they were fragmented. And then as well, we had some beads, because when we took her skull out, we had, I noticed basically on her scapula, just because it was kind of like under her shoulder, sorry, her skull was kind of like on top of her shoulder like this, but there was like a line of beads in her, on her scapula, so basically in situ where, you know, the string would have disintegrated. We then were looking much more actively and more finely and sieving the sand all around her head with like a finer mesh, and we found a bunch of beads which you could then make towards a necklace, and they were all just really cool. I haven't had a chance to fully read the article yet. I bought this, but I do intend to, and it's just really cool to own something, even if I'm not like a contributing author, like I'm not even mentioned in the article. It's just really cool that something that I participated in made it into a journal article. I just find that fun. So basically this was a long way of saying that this whole experience really contributed to my decisions going forward about my life and my career and what I was going to study. And I wasn't allowed to dig these skeletons on my own because, like I said, I'd never done osteo or an osteology course before. I didn't know anything about human remains, so I had another student who did, helping me out. And just that experience kind of led me to think, okay, this might be something I want to take further, and therefore I chose my classes for the next year based on that. And the first class that I did that semester, really long way to get from A to B here, it was Introduction to Human Osteology, which I did not do good in. Surprise, surprise. I passed it, but I didn't get like a D or anything. Like I got like an average grade, but I didn't do as well as I was used to doing in other classes. And I think that had a lot to do with the fact that just it was a much different class style to what I was used to. It was a lot about memorization. You had to memorize each bone. And then our midterm and our final were bell ringer tests, which are very common when you're studying osteology, where you have stations around the entire room. And then you'll have a piece of paper. You get a minute or 2 minutes at a station to answer on the paper a question about the bone or whatever's on the station in front of you, and then you have to move on, and you can't go back to a station and look at it later. But yeah, I know that I almost failed the midterm, but it wasn't just me. So the whole class didn't do well in that midterm with the exception of a couple people. After that, I kind of, you know, got my crap together, studied really hard, and I did well on the exam later on. Then I also did Archaeology of Egypt, which was my bag because, as I've said before, I originally wanted to be an Egyptologist. I'd read about it extensively. Hatshepsut is like one of my favorite historical figures of all time, and I've read tons of books about her. And I think that was also that class, my friend and I, we teamed up together to do a project about the Temple of Karnak in Egypt. And it's so nerdy. We put on our presentation, when we had to give our presentation about it, we put HPA his name and then HPA my name, which is High Priest or High Priestess of Amun. It's just like, oh, we were such nerds, but we thought it was really funny that we did that. The other classes I took were the Iron Age of Greece and Anatolia. So again, this ties into the fact that I was doing more classics courses. I believe this is when I did a paper on the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus in Turkey, which was quite cool. When a couple years ago I actually got to go to the British Museum and see the column bases from that temple, which I actually wrote the paper on. I was almost got the chance to go to Ephesus and actually see the site when I was in Turkey this past summer, but it was just slightly too far away from where I was staying, and I didn't want to go on a tour bus that would basically drive 3 hours there, give me 2 hours on the site, and then spend the rest of the time taking us around to places where they'd get a commission for shopping. I really wanted to be able to spend the whole day there if I wanted, but I will go back. I will go one day. I will make it in the future. And then the last course of that semester was Archaeology of Ancient Palestine, which is obviously focused on the area that I had been digging in that previous summer. And is one of the specialties of the professors that worked at my school. I think that was a class that I got by a new professor who was a linguist. I don't exactly remember what was in that class, but as you may notice, I only took 4 classes that semester, and that was because my summer course basically counted for 2 credits rather than just the standard 1. So that meant from that point onwards, I only had to take 4 classes a semester rather than the regular 5. So that was my fall semester. I did well, I did okay. I was still very active in our Laurier Archaeology Society, Student Archaeology Society. I believe I was still the webmaster for our website, or the events person. So I managed our Facebook page and whatever. And then we go on to winter semester, and I started off with Etruscans and early Rome. So again, more classics heavy stuff than I would have taken otherwise. The archaeology of Syria and Jordan. So Palestine, kind of the Israel-Palestine area. Now we move on into Jordan and Syria, so still focused on that particular area. And then I had development of archaeological theory, which is this class that I got to take instead of the statistics class. And to be honest, I actually found that class really, really interesting. We had a couple really cool projects that we got to do for it. One being we had to kind of choose a topic of pseudo-archaeology. So this is basically, the people that talk about aliens and the pyramids being a time portal, representations of archaeology in the media, and we had to do presentations on it. So they had pre-prepared topics, and Indiana Jones was a topic that was already taken. So I instead asked if I could do a project on other movie representations of archaeologists. So my project was analyzing the 2 Tomb Raider movies with Angelina Jolie, The Mummy 1, 2, and 3. The third one is that new one that was set in China, not The Scorpion King. That didn't feature archaeologists, so I didn't really talk about it. And I just remember the one thing from it, I had put together a bunch of clips from the films about the really craziest parts of it, and the one that I always remember was a scene from The Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, The Mummy 3, where they had, and I just showed a scene where they had a bunch of Yetis rescuing them in the Himalayas. And I just kind of stopped the clip and I was like, Yetis! There's Yetis in this movie. They have nothing to do with archaeology. And then my second project for that class, so we basically had to pick a theoretical model, viewpoint, whatever, and a site, and then make a paper about a site, using that model. And mine was I had to write about the Pyramid of the Sun in the city of Teotihuacan, Mexico, from the viewpoint of second wave feminism. Not two things that you would necessarily think would go together, but what I liked about it was that it kind of proved to me that if you work hard enough, you can pretty much argue anything from any viewpoint. It was also eye-opening in that we had obviously never done a lot of stuff about South American archaeology or archaeological sites. That was not something that my program specialized in. So it was nice to actually kind of go a bit outside of our regular bubble and learn about a new civilization and culture that I didn't really know anything about. And Teotihuacan is really cool because it predates like the Aztecs and the Maya, and nobody really knows much about it. It's still quite mysterious, but they were this civilization that like dominated their area and built this massive city with these huge pyramids, but didn't really leave tons behind for us to know about them in terms of like texts and whatever. So that they were even a bit of a mystery to the Aztecs who came after them. So that's really, I really enjoyed learning about them, and I look forward to the day that I can actually visit the city of Teotihuacan and climb the Pyramid of the Sun, which I wrote about in a paper. So my last course of my third year was an elective course. So basically I didn't have to take something within the archaeology department, and I was trying to do something a little bit different. So I ended up taking a religions department course, which was Asian religions of China and Japan. Again, it was a nice to kind of get out of the bubble that I had been in before, and I found it to be really interesting. I learned a lot of stuff about China and Japan that I didn't know before. It covered a lot about like the history of China and Confucianism, their gods and goddesses that they had before Confucianism and Buddhism. Same with Japan. We talked a lot about the Shinto religion, and then Buddhism and Zen Buddhism. Pretty much every class that I did that year, as with pretty much every class I did for my entire degree. So my assessments were generally a midterm exam, a final exam on the content of the classes, and then I would have either 1 or 2 essays of a certain length that I would have to write on a topic for that class. Obviously I did well enough. I passed everything. I didn't do amazingly, but you know, I didn't do horribly, and I was generally happy with my grades. I actually had lined up that summer to spend 3 months in Jordan again. This was because my original field school was obviously going back for another semester, and I also got invited to a second field school, which is because the osteologist who was running the site that I was telling you about before, I think I made a decent impression on her. I was talking to her a lot about how I was really interested. I went back to school and I did an osteology course so that I had some kind of that background knowledge. She had a kind of separate dig at a different site than the site that I was working on. It was in the same area, but because we didn't have tons of skeletal material and we couldn't, because we weren't digging a cemetery, it was only when we kind of came across these like different period burials is when she ever actually really needed to be on site. So she kind of had her own little like side project that she would go and do with some students from her university. And so in the summer of 2011, it just so happened that she wasn't going to be doing it alongside my other project. She was going to go by herself rather than as an addition to. So she arranged it so that her field school was going to be running throughout most of the month of May and half of June. And my other field school, my original field school, was going to be running from the middle to end of June into the end of July. And she basically invited me to go onto her osteology specific field school. Since I was, going to be there already, I was going to go back and do another summer at my other field school. So yeah, I had 3 months lined up in Jordan. My next video in this series is obviously going to cover that period, that second summer that I spent in Jordan. And then we will then after that move on to my 4th and final year of my degree. As I've said before, this is about 8 years ago, so it might be a bit out of date, and I know that the program at my school is not the same now as it was before, but that doesn't mean that it's any lesser. It's just slightly different. They still run field schools, they still work in Jordan, and I hope that this has given some people some useful information. If you are someone that's studying archaeology, what kind of courses have you taken? What do you think was something that was helpful for you? Are you like me where you maybe should have taken a course like the stats course for me, or are you you finding that? So I'd like to kind of leave off with some questions that we can have a bit of a dialogue in the comment section with you guys. If you're someone who's studying archaeology, what kind of courses are you taking? What are you finding really enjoyable? What are you not finding so enjoyable? If you're someone that's considering archaeology, has this been helpful for you? What more kind of stuff would you want to know? I'm always happy to take on suggestions.